Welcome back, everybody, to the Star Lady Soul Reader Network. This is Media Monk, and on this full moon, I'm pleased to be joined by our shining star of the zodiac, Star Lady. Are you there, Star Lady?
Hello, Media Monk.
Most of us remember Star Lady is indeed Kim Marie, the managing director for our network. EAN continues to certify new evolutionary astrologers worldwide through its EA course and coursework. We also participate with those associates of EA with monthly webinars for students, podcasts like these. We do a lot of forecasting webinars, which brings up our Mars retrograde in Aries coming up Wednesday, September 2nd at 6 to 8 p.m. I've sent out several newsletters, so you got to kind of be on the Astro news list to get those notices, and you can register right there. Very easy, just give your name and email address and pay the fee. And what that does, of course, is get you registered with the webinar service, and then they communicate directly with you. We're going to go 6 to 8 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time on September 2nd for a complete Mars retrograde in Aries. A look at this, our desire nature, I would say, Star Lady, to sum it up. What else would you highlight for people that want to participate that haven't already registered?
I'm going to give credit to you, Media Monk, something you said a month or so back with this Mars retrograde. Looking for a purposeful trigger. How can we choose actions that move us forward through Mars retrograde in its own sign, Aries, squaring the Jupiter-Saturn-Pluto stellium in the sky, and the explosion of violence that we see going on in so many different ways. So I love your phrase, purposeful trigger. Deliberately choosing action forward.
That's exactly right. You know, we've been conditioned against vigorous action. And what's going to really happen with all of us during this rare retrograde Mars in Aries is you're going to discover how you either misused your aggression or initiative or self-will, and how that really resulted in a lot of passivity rather than being in the moment and being able to respond, not necessarily aggressively or violently, but just respond in the moment rather than this passive-aggressive behavior that I think this type of transit is really the birthplace of passive-aggressive behavior on the planet. So join us, get your enrollment, register at the webinar service. You don't have to be there live on Wednesday night if you have a conflict. I will send you a link to the entire webinar with a couple of audio files on the first page. Obviously, the video webinar will be there too. You get all the slides for printout, so you can take a salient slide on the research that Star Lady has done and print it out, put it above your workstation. Kind of stay tuned to this long retrograde at the end of 2020. It's really the capstone of a busy year for sure, and yes, a somewhat violent year, a somewhat aggressive year. So we call it the wild ride, and this is going to be the capstone of the wild ride. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Star Lady, and enjoy the full moon podcast, everybody.
Well, Media Monk, I just have to make a comment. Aries, Libra. Yes, I can see where the patriarchal distortions of that can be origins of passive-aggressive energy rather than being direct. But remember, a qualifier here, Star Lady has natal Mars in Libra, the opposite of Mars' natural rulership, Aries. The Mars retrograde in Aries is pointing towards Libra. A Mars retrograde in general is considered action versus impulsive actions. And so I just have to say we can't just point blank color everything passive-aggressive with distortions of Mars.
Yeah, that's probably my projection and my, what I have noticed, or what has angered me, Mars, Aries, So that's been in my consciousness, and the last thing I want to do is infect a wonderful webinar coming up with my own projections. So we'll leave it at that and see what comes up from Star Lady's perspective on Wednesday night.
Well, and another qualifier, Media Monk, you were born with Mars retrograde natally. So
yes, in Pisces, in the 10th house. Yeah, so I have
Pisces,
my own stuff
Capricorn.
going on.
Yep, you can be a little more triggered than most with Mars retrograde, but you also though have an opportunity to find clarity of actions a little easier than others when transiting Mars as retrograde relative to being born with Mars retrograde. There we go.
Yeah.
All right,
well,
you want more details? Go ahead.
Oh, I'm just saying everything with EA is not superficial. You know, there's not a cookie cutter answer, but we do tend to look for the more psychological reasons based upon our own natal chart and where the transits are headed. So, yeah, thank you for that clarification, Star Lady.
Hey, one of the toughest things for an astrologer is getting their own filter out of the picture.
Oh.
Easier said than done. And on the ultimate broadest level, you can't do it 100% because you have your own, living, breathing will, Mars, that comes through. So you work as best as possible to be neutral and not assume. And you also then, especially with evolutionary astrology, do your best to put yourself in the other person's shoes to understand where they're coming from, so then you can be a helping hand from their perspective, and yet also help them to recognize any conditioning factors, any, as we have a tendency to say, patriarchal distortions, and help them return to natural spiritual principles. So we have a very active forecast, lots of inner planetary aspects with Sun, Mercury, and Venus. But we are starting out here with the full moon of Pisces, which is going to take place early September 2nd at 10 degrees Moon in Pisces. So I'm going to repeat the Virgo mantra. I discern with intuitive wholeness. I discern Virgo with intuitive wholeness, Pisces. That's going to be the theme for this full moon. So we all know Sun in Virgo is, the time of year when we get to analyze Virgo, where we get to look at all the details of something and then try to figure it out or even try to put it together. And there is a religious saying that I love to quote: the whole is greater than the parts that make it up. And that is the lesson of the last archetype, Pisces, which includes all 11 archetypes that came before it. That 12th archetype, Pisces 12th house ruler Neptune, is about trying to hold that whole picture together. That's why that archetype can sometimes be so confusing. And so here's that full moon balance between, Virgo wanting to take all these puzzle pieces and one by one put them all together, and the polarity Pisces, which is the wholeness. And it's like when you get that last piece of the puzzle put together, then all of a sudden you're looking at the whole picture and you get that satisfaction of that 1,000-piece puzzle, and you take a deep breath, and that complete picture is more than all of those pieces of putting it together. This is the energy of the full moon of Pisces that we're in the midst of. So, how well can you step back, take a deep breath, and see that whole picture. How well, for instance, can you see the different perspectives that are going on right now? The right's creating all this violence. No, the left is creating all this violence. No, both sides are creating all this violence. How well can you step back and take a deep breath and, not choose to just allow somebody to hurt you or abuse you? But how well can you step back and walk the path of peace as best as possible? A little tougher to do right now with Mars in its own sign, Aries, getting ready to turn retrograde September 9th at 28 degrees Aries, and it will be retrograde for about 5 weeks here, a little bit of a shorter Mars retrograde cycle. It goes direct November 14th at 15 degrees Aries. So one more time, Mars retrograde September 9th through November 14th from 28 to 15 degrees Aries. Been saying all year, this is the hardest retrograde to experience because the ruler of the first archetype, Aries first house, Mars, always wants to initiate. It's the leading edge of our desire nature. When Mars goes retrograde, it's a time to slow down and reflect upon our desires and what no longer serves our soul. What new desires are emerging out? How do we take a deep breath and consider our actions forward? And Mars is the traditional, ruler of war. There can be many types of warring with each other in this modern world. It doesn't have to necessarily be picking up a gun. It can be done with words. It can be done with all kinds of other actions. So how well can the entire planet take a deep breath? As Leroy said, that purposeful trigger, as you become clear on the best actions for you, personally, the best actions for you in participating in your world, then how can you choose to initiate moving forward? Moving forward over these next few months, especially here in the U.S., as we head into that presidential election we have once every 4 years. Heads up, everybody, we got a Mercury retrograde cycle that's going to come in the midst of that between October 13th through November 3rd. Mercury's going to go stationary direct on election day. Oh, let's add that communication mix-up into the picture right now. We'll talk more on that as we move through. One of the things that I do want to point out during this during this full moon podcast, well, actually two things. One is that when Mars goes retrograde September 9th, we will have 7 planets retrograde for 3 days. September 9th through September 12th. On the 12th, Jupiter finishes up a 4-month retrograde cycle and turns direct at 17.5 Capricorn. So we're going to have 3 days, if you include Chiron, 7 planets retrograde in the sky. Talk about throwing off, retrograde, review, reevaluate, throw off consensus conditionings, liberate into a sense of our own individualism. Many expressions on that. Let's just say it's going to stir things up, create a lot of polarizing energy in practical terms. In the midst of that, Mercury communications at 8 Libra will oppose Chiron retrograde in Aries. I hurt, no, you hurt. You're the bad guy. No, you're the bad guy. Whew, take a deep breath, pray for peace. We will also have the highlight of the Neptune retrograde cycle. Sun at 19 Virgo opposing Neptune retrograde at 19 Pisces. I'm the victim. No, I'm the victim. You're the bad one. No, you're the bad one. Pot calling the kettle black. Whose beliefs are right? Whose beliefs are wrong? Oh, well, again, can we step back, take a deep breath, and recognize that every individual soul on the planet gets to find their own path home to Source. And every individual soul can take as many lifetimes as necessary to get there. How well can we really, really hold that last archetype, Neptune in its own sign, Pisces? How well can we hold that space for everyone as we hold the healthy boundaries? Your freedom ends at my nose, and my freedom ends at your nose. How well can we really hold that energy? Time will tell. We'll find out. The second thing is that we have a lot of planets in the Earth signs, Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. And so in between the Virgo planets having oppositions to Pisces, Neptune, and Aries, Chiron, we have Uranus retrograde in Taurus, and of course the Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn, stellium retrograde in Capricorn, and Mercury in Virgo, and then Sun in Virgo will make trines to all of these. And so if we look at a grand trine in the Earth archetype, Earth is the physical, okay? And so here we are dealing with resources. And probably the most obvious thing that we can see going on right now, if you look at it from the perspective of the United States, is you see all of the protests going on in regards to racism. You know, a black man getting shot in the back 7 times versus just going for the kneecap. And so the protesting that we see going on is the damage being done to businesses, the damage being done to resources with buildings and all of that. So we see the distortions of resources being destroyed. If I don't have it, you don't get it, and I'm going to go in and hurt your business. I'm going to go in and destroy your resources. And I don't think any of us who listen to this podcast condones violence or condones destroying the resources of someone else to obliterate them. So it brings up the broader question, though, of why does this happen? And if we can step back and look at it from a broad perspective, we can realize that from the Taurus perspective, food, clothing, shelter, survival, like an archetype of the zodiac, survival. When we have enough food, clothing, and shelter to support ourselves, to take care of our children and feed them, that has a tendency to decrease the violence. You know, when I'm going to be a little facetious here, you know, when you are fat, happy, well-fed, you don't, it lessens that margin energy to go out there and destroy. And, you know, you can look to studies that have been done across various countries or areas on the planet. When you go in and you do, again, the biblical term, when we take care of the least of us, then we're all okay. And I think this is some of this broader picture that's going on, full moon of Pisces. Stay tuned. We'll see how all this unfolds through this month of September, which is going to be quite busy with aspects in these Earth triune. And as we've been talking, through this wild ride of 2020 with Jupiter growth, Saturn contraction, both of them in Capricorn, along with Pluto the soul, individually, collectively, as we've looked at this Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn stellium in Capricorn, and we have these extremes of wealth, whereas, for instance, through the 6 months of the coronavirus here in the United States, the 0.1% has saw their wealth increase $600 billion. I'm not saying that we go out and just throw money away, but there is a better way to take care of our social support systems. This is what's being stirred up. This is what's being distributed. And I have a little example that I really want to share with you that I thought was interesting. And I know that sometimes our little microism, Western South Dakota community is 70,000, might be a little different than a lot of other areas. But, in our little community, I forget what the latest statistic is, but we're somewhere around 20 to 25% of our community is Native American. And so we have a mayor who is a former police chief. And Media Monk and I have just been we very much like this person because he's come off the beat of the street, and he is knowledgeable about what I would say we have to look at why systems are in place and how we get things to change. And so we just had the most recent police chief retire to go take a private job. And there was an article today on the new police chief and the education that he's had. And I'm like, wow, this is someone who is going beyond just the law and order and educating himself so that he has a minor in psychology. He went on to get a master's degree to study social systems, and he's learned the Lakota language so he can go out there into the streets and actually speak to those in our community who tend to get into trouble in their own language. He says, if I'm asking them to go outside their comfort zone, I better be able to go outside of my comfort zone. So I decided I needed to be able to speak their language. And now he's educating himself with a PhD, one class a semester, and his most recent studies are systems of violence and origins of violence and how to address them. And he's studying this from various communities across the country and across the world. And he is studying systems of nonviolence to see if he can find something that works here. And I'm like, whoa, that is so, in my world, positive and healthy to see your chief of police going, we can't just be law and order. We've got to figure out where does this stem from And how can we change systems to be more and more nonviolent and more peaceful resolutions? And so when you hear that phrase, defund the police, that is what it means. It's not getting rid of your police department. We have spent the last 20 to 30 years in this country defunding social support systems to where the jail is where we put our mental health people, rather than giving them the resources to have food, clothing, and shelter, rather than giving them the resources of healthy nutrition versus just drugging them down to be a zombie. Probably preaching to the choir here. But I wanted to give you an example of something in our small little community that I had no idea of. The media monk's always teasing me, well, why do you subscribe to the newspaper anymore? That's why, media monk, for that little detail. And not that I can't get it online, but I'm an old newspaper girl, so I like that physical earth trying, everybody. I like that physical paper.
Yeah, I love collecting all the newspapers and magazines and putting them in the recycling bin too, honey. Thank you.
No, you like burning them in the fire pit. So anyway, that's just an example for you. Jupiter turning stationary direct is giving us all some opportunities of aha moments and how we really want to move forward with our understandings from this summer. We also have Mercury going into Libra, and it's in Libra September 5th to September 27th. Mercury's pulled ahead of the sun. It's going to start coming out as an evening star. I didn't look that little detail up. I'll see if I can get this for you really quick. But Mercury and Libra, we're either going to learn how to listen better, or with the extremes of polarity we see going on in this country, it's quite possible that the polarization is just going to intensify. And in the midst of all that, how can we do our best to listen, to communicate, or even, sometimes just having the agree to disagree rather than all of the convert and convince. I'm not going to find Mercury as an evening star in the sky very easy. So as Mercury's going to have one opposition to Mars just before the retrograde. It's going to be the end of September. We also have Venus going into Leo. Venus has been making those oppositions to Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn, and kind of polarizing many of us. Again, Cancer, Capricorn, as we've been rehashing over the last few years. It's, my community versus your community. Can we see ourselves as a global community? Because we are, one way or another. The air doesn't know boundaries. The natural world doesn't know our geopolitical boundaries. Venus is going to move on into Leo September 6th through October 2nd. And when Venus goes into Leo, the distortions of it go, me first, me first, me first, me first. Oh, me first. My creativity, my needs in relationships, I'm more important than you. Natural Venus in Leo is loving ourselves deeply on an inward level. I need to see myself inwardly. I need to love myself. And when I do that, that lessens that Leonian insecurity. It lessens the jealousy of the squares to Scorpio. And it goes, I can see love and creativity in everyone. So we might see the polarizations go to their consensus extremes more and more for the next couple of months. But we also have opportunities to be the examples in the world that we want to see in the world. And that is by far probably the biggest thing that you can do over the next few months. Be the example that you want to see in the world. When you pray, move your feet. That means the old African proverb, you pray with your feet. You act upon your prayers. You co-create with Source. You don't sit back into the laziness of the grand earth trine and think or expect the other to do it for you. You do it for yourself. And then how do you help another learn to do it for themselves? All right, everybody. One more time. Getting ready to do that Mars retrograde in Aries webinar. It is very, very active. Stay tuned. That's where I'll go into a lot of detail with my latest forecasting on what we see coming up over the next few months with the U.S. election, etc., and the planet. Media Monk, I ran out of words for the moment.
Okay, that's all right. Well, let's just call it what it is then. Until next new moon, remember to be joyful and pray with your feet on this always long and sweet journey to the core of your soul. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you Wednesday night for Mars retrograde in Aries.